Take a look at this stretch of dry, mountainous terrain in Logar Province, Afghanistan, about 30 kilometers southeast of Kabul. From above, it looks like nothing, just brown hills and scattered ruins. But beneath this exact patch of ground sits one of the largest untapped copper deposits on Earth, over 12 million metric tons of it, worth an estimated $50 to $100 billion on its own. And this single deposit is just one piece of a much bigger picture. A 2010 Pentagon assessment concluded that Afghanistan as a whole is sitting on more than $1 trillion in mineral wealth, iron, copper, lithium, rare earth elements, enough to earn the country an internal nickname among American officials, the Saudi Arabia of lithium. 15 years later, almost none of it has ever been mined. So how does a country sit on top of one of the largest untapped mineral fortunes on the planet, confirmed by multiple governments, and still remain one of the poorest nations on Earth? The answer does not lie in a single, sudden discovery or a sensationalized headline. Instead, it is written in decades of quiet, systematic scientific labor. What looks like dry, barren Earth is actually a contiguous, nationwide mineral system. Between the 1960s and the 1980s, Soviet geologists from the state-run agency Technoexport VNIOGS traversed the country, cataloging mineral fields, drafting topographic sheets, and compiling foundational data in Report R0815. Following the regime change in 2002, the U.S. Geological Survey partnered with the Afghanistan Geological Survey to digitize these legacy maps. By combining old Soviet cartography with modern hyperspectral satellite data, they produced the 2007 Preliminary Non-Fuel Mineral Resource Assessment. This research, led by scientists like Stephen Peters, proved that the country's wealth is not clustered in a few lucky pockets. Instead, the joint team identified more than 1,400 mineral deposits distributed across all 34 Afghan provinces. The data showed massive overlapping belts of copper, iron, lithium, and rare earth elements stretching from the high passes of Badakhshan to the southern plains of Helmand. When the Pentagon's Task Force for Business and Stability Operations applied contemporary market prices to these verified tonnages in 2010, the aggregate in situ value crossed the $1 trillion threshold. This was not a sudden projection, but the mathematical culmination of a 50-year scientific lineage, verified by opposing superpowers. The maps did not outline isolated anomalies, but rather a geological baseline of unprecedented scale. The resources were undeniably there, documented down to the coordinates and grade. But mapping a fortune on paper is not the same as pulling it from the ground. At the heart of this paper fortune are three core regions holding resources that could reshape global supply chains. In the rugged, high-altitude passes of Bamiyan Province lies Hajigak, a massive deposit containing an estimated 2 billion metric tons of high-grade iron ore. At current market rates, this single site holds raw iron valued at roughly $336 billion, offering a domestic supply that could fuel regional industrialization for generations. To the east, in Logar Province, the ancient site of Mes Aynak hosts one of the largest untapped copper reserves on Earth, containing more than 12 million metric tons of metal. In addition to industrial steel and copper, the geological maps outline critical elements for the 21st century. Far within Ghazni, Nuristan, and Helmand provinces lie extensive lithium-bearing pegmatite belts, the fundamental ingredient for the global battery and electric vehicle industries. Surrounding these districts are concentrated veins of cobalt, rare earth elements, chromium, and high-value gemstones. Taken together, this diverse resource mix forms a complete, world-class strategic raw material base for the global electronics and clean energy industries. Yet, these massive industrial reserves remain locked beneath the barren surface, untouched by modern mining machinery. Soviet geologists began mapping the territory during the 1980s military occupation. Working under the state-run agency Technoexport, field crews braved active combat zones to catalog the country's mineral potential. They drafted topographic sheets, recorded geologic cross-sections, and compiled their findings into Report R0815, noting extensive copper, iron, and lithium anomalies across multiple provinces. When the Red Army withdrew in 1989, this vast archive vanished from international view. Many of the original documents remained classified in Moscow, while copies in Kabul were hidden away by local staff to protect them from the civil war and the Taliban regime. Following the 2001 U.S. invasion, American geologists arrived in Kabul and made an unexpected discovery. Hidden in the library of the Afghan Geological Survey were the surviving Soviet charts, kept safe for over a decade by Afghan staff who had risked their lives to preserve them. Senior scientist Jack Medlin and his team used these hand-drawn maps as the baseline for a modern search. Between 2007 and 2010, the U.S. Geological Survey, alongside the Pentagon's Task Force for Business and Stability Operations, launched a massive reassessment. They deployed specialized aircraft equipped with advanced gravity and magnetic sensors, flying thousands of miles to peer beneath the rugged terrain. This airborne campaign digitized the old Soviet coordinates, verified the vast scale of the deposits, and mapped unexplored districts, revealing that the old cartography was remarkably accurate. The quiet research became front-page news in June 2010, when journalist James Risen published an exposé in the New York Times. Citing internal Pentagon memos, the report introduced the world to Afghanistan's trillion-dollar wealth, calling the country a potential strategic hub for industrial metals like lithium. This global headline represented the culmination of a long scientific lineage, built through decades of war, secrecy, and international collaboration. 50 million years ago, the landmass of India collided with the Eurasian tectonic plate, initiating a colossal continental smash that reshaped the geology of Asia. The ongoing collision drove the rapid uplift of the Himalayas and the rugged, high-altitude ranges of the Hindu Kush, fracturing the crust across what is now Afghanistan. The intense tectonic forces created a web of systematic fault lines, subjecting buried rock formations to immense heat and pressure. Far beneath the surface, volcanic systems active during this mountain-building era forced superheated, mineral-rich fluids upward through the shattered crust. As these fluids circulated and cooled within the host rocks, they deposited concentrated veins of metals, creating massive porphyry copper zones, sediment-hosted copper systems, and rich magnetite iron deposits. This tectonic activity placed the territory directly within the Tethyan metallogenic belt, a prolific mineralized corridor shared with neighboring Pakistan and Iran. The same structural forces generated extensive pegmatite fields, where highly incompatible elements like lithium, niobium, and tantalum concentrated over millions of years. The barren, windswept mountains visible today are the surface expression of this violent geologic past, concealing a subterranean system where ancient heat and pressure transformed raw elements into concentrated industrial resources. In 2007, even before the trillion-dollar figure made global headlines, international mining conglomerates moved to lock down Afghanistan's resources. The pioneer was China Metallurgical Group Corporation, known as MCC. The state-backed Chinese giant secured a historic 30-year lease for the Mez Aynak copper deposit in a deal valued at approximately $3 billion. This contract went far beyond a simple mining concession. It was designed as a catalyst for a national industrial revolution. MCC committed to building a complete extraction ecosystem, including a coal-fired power plant, a commercial copper smelter, schools, hospitals, and a passenger and freight railway linking Kabul to neighboring trade networks. The project promised thousands of local jobs and millions of dollars in annual royalties. Soon after, the race expanded to the iron reserves of Hajigak, where a consortium of Indian steel companies, led by the Steel Authority of India, initiated plans for a separate multi-billion-dollar development. Other global mining groups from Europe and the Americas began evaluating concessions, dispatching teams to Kabul to review legacy geological data. For a brief window, the nation appeared poised for a rapid, resource-led transformation. The raw materials under the soil were no longer theoretical. They were actively being priced by the world's largest industrial economies, ready to build a new sovereign state on a foundation of copper and steel. The copper of Mez Aynak does not lie beneath empty desert. It sits directly beneath a massive 500,000 square meter, 5th century Buddhist monastery complex. This ancient walled city, spanning roughly 6 square kilometers, houses dozens of stupas, fortified monasteries, and over 600 large Buddha statues, mapping a pre-Islamic copper mining tradition dating back to the 2nd century BC. To extract the 12 million tons of copper, the China Metallurgical Group Corporation would have to obliterate this irreplaceable archaeological heritage. The conflict between extraction and preservation was profiled internationally in the documentary Saving Mez Aynak, raising global awareness of the impending destruction. A team of international and Afghan archaeologists, led by Philippe Marquis, raced to rescue movable artifacts under a series of tight deadlines, facing a final cutoff at the end of December 2026. But heritage was only the first barrier. The project was soon paralyzed by physical violence. The surrounding mountains of Logar Province remained active combat zones. Insurgents launched repeated attacks on security outposts, ambushed supply convoys, and kidnapped technical staff. Even those working to preserve the ruins faced extreme danger. Archaeologist Abdul Wahab Ferozi was killed in a targeted attack. Beneath these physical threats lay systemic institutional rot. The original $3 billion concession signed in 2007 was compromised from its inception. In 2017, the former general manager of the corporation, Shen Hating, who brokered the deal, was expelled from the Chinese Communist Party following a major investigation into substantial kickbacks. With its leadership discredited, the Chinese consortium sought to strip away its commitments, attempting to abandon plans to build the railway, the coal-fired power plant, and the copper smelter. The deal collapsed under the weight of these competing forces. Ancient history, unceasing warfare, and corporate corruption converged on a single patch of earth, ensuring that one of the largest copper reserves in Asia remained trapped in the rock. By the mid-2010s, China Metallurgical Group Corporation's operations at Mes Aynak had ground to a complete halt. Although the state-backed consortium retained its exclusive 30-year lease, the physical work transitioned into a state of indefinite freeze. This paralysis quickly spread beyond Logar Province. To the west, the massive Hajagak iron ore concession suffered an identical fate. The Indian-led consortium, which had won a $10.3 billion contract in 2011, quietly abandoned its plans as the security environment deteriorated. Armed groups repeatedly targeted cargo convoys along the transit routes, and the total lack of electrical grids and heavy freight rail networks meant that moving 2 billion metric tons of raw iron ore remained a physical impossibility. These failures reveal a broader systemic reality. Global mining data compiled by S&P Global shows that even in stable, developed countries, a major mineral project takes an average of 15.7 years to move from initial discovery to active commercial production. In fragile, conflict-affected states, that timeline routinely stretches past 20 years or collapses altogether due to security disruptions, legal chaos, and capital flight. For Afghanistan, this structural timeline exposes the core illusion of the trillion-dollar estimate. Mapping a resource on paper is a scientific achievement, but extracting it requires a stable civil infrastructure that decades of war have prevented from ever taking root. Without roads, power plants, or security, the country's vast mineral reserves remain trapped in the earth. In August 2021, the return of the Taliban turned these trapped reserves from a remote economic hope into an immediate instrument of state survival. After Western governments froze $9 billion in Afghan foreign reserves and cut off international aid, which previously funded 75% of the public budget, the new regime faced sudden economic collapse. Operating under heavy global sanctions, the administration turned to the soil, positioning mineral extraction as its primary revenue generator. With Western firms out of the picture, Beijing became the most consistent outside partner, driven by strategic interests and a desire for border stability. By August 2023, Minister of Mines Shahabuddin Dilawar signed 7 major mining contracts for gold, copper, and iron, representing over $6.5 billion in pledged foreign investment. For the cash-strapped administration, these agreements prioritize immediate capital injections to maintain security and control. The trillion-dollar mineral wealth is no longer a path toward broad national development. It is a financial lifeline for an isolated government. Subscribe to our channel for more investigations into global resource conflicts. The grandest of these deals was announced in May 2023, when the Chinese firm Gochin presented a proposal worth $10 billion to target Afghanistan's untapped lithium reserves. The plan promised extensive infrastructure, including a new power dam and transport tunnels through the Hindu Kush. Meanwhile, the 7 major contracts signed in late August, valued at over $6.5 billion, targeted gold, copper, iron, lead, and zinc projects across 4 provinces. But beneath these towering headlines lies a highly fractured reality. While Beijing-backed firms hold the largest formal concessions, actual operations remain tiny, plagued by the absolute lack of industrial power grids and heavy freight rail. Instead of funding state development, much of the active mining is siphoned off. Local armed groups and smugglers bypass formal channels entirely, trucking high-value minerals across porous borders into Pakistan and Iran. This illicit pipeline generates tens of millions of dollars annually, feeding a parallel economy of local warlords rather than the central treasury. The trillion-dollar fortune remains largely trapped, slipping through the fingers of the state and into a black market of survival. Today, the gap between Afghanistan's barren surface and its buried billions remains unbridged. This trillion-dollar paradox proves that geology is not destiny. Natural wealth without institutional stability only guarantees stagnation. Until governance matches the scale of these resources, the treasure will remain trapped in the dust. Subscribe for more deep dives into global geopolitics.